Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Talking Law from Women in the Law UK. I'm Sally Penny, MBE, a barrister at Kenworthy's Chambers in Manchester, the Joint Vice Chair of the Association of Women Barristers and the founder of Women in the Law UK. There are just a few days to go now until our International Women's Day conference on the 5th of March. We'd love you to attend. Do find out how on our website, womeninthelawuk.com. Today, I'm talking law with a heavyweight in the legal profession. A man called to the bar in 1978 and who took silk in 1999, Gerard McDermott QC. Gerard is an international barrister working extensively in the USA and specialises in the most complex personal injury cases. Gerard was lead counsel for the Health Authority in the Shipman Inquiry and is presently instructed to jointly lead the claims for compensation for over 800 victims of the Grenfell Tower Tragedy. I started our conversation with Gerard telling me about the exact moment he knew he wanted to be a barrister, aged 12.
I can remember the moment walking down a corridor at school when I decided that's what I would do. I wanted to either be a barrister or perhaps a stockbroker. Stockbrokers made more money in those days. Now they make a lot more money. I was interested in the law and I was interested in economics. I had no connections in the bar at all.
Yes.
And I never really wavered. So I pursued that through my A-levels, and then I went to Manchester University. Never thought of becoming a solicitor. Joined Middle Temple. There was then a short pause because when I did my bar finals, I thought about doing other things.
Oh.
Your listeners may be interested to know that I once went for an interview as a salesman with Pedigree Pet Foods. It was a 2-day interview and we got put up overnight. And I did a number of other interviews. But in terms of legal stuff, I didn't get pupillage right away. And the bar was very different then.
Were there many women?
There were some. There weren't as many. I suppose I was lucky that I knew quite a lot of women, certainly at Manchester University, who were coming to the bar.
Yes.
And in fact, when I did my bar finals, I shared a house in East London with 2 women who I've been at university with. Yeah, I think there were. I think it's not as good as it is now, but I think it was changing at that time.
Yes. Forgive me, I interrupted you. So the Pedigree Pet Foods loss was the bar's gain, I think.
Well, they didn't offer me a job anyway. But perhaps more interesting is I didn't get pupillage right away, and there wasn't any formal approach to it. And I wasn't terribly worried about rushing into pupillage. And, one didn't go looking for commercial chambers or family chambers. It was much more a common law effort. But for 6 months, I worked for Ferranti, who were a very big and very innovative electronics company based in the Northwest and over the world, in fact, but they had a huge base in the Northwest. And I worked as a lawyer in their personnel department. And I always think that taught me so much. It taught me about business. It taught me about human relations.
Yes.
It taught me about employment practices and so on. And in fact, as a junior, I did a lot of employment law. I still do some, and I've never forgot some of the things that I learned there.
Yes.
And then I came to the bar in March 1979.
And have stayed. I mean, your career is sort of a dream for many of us juniors, really. Have you always wanted to stay, or did you get cold or itchy feet at any point at all?
Well, interesting that. In the course of my career, I became involved in bar council work. It was suggested to me by Michael Shorrock and Julian Hall, who were very senior circuiteers, that I might want to go on the bar council and represent the circuit's interests on the Young Barristers Committee, which I did. And Ben Heitner was leader at about that time, perhaps a little later. And I got very involved in the bar council. I suppose I'd been on it for maybe 70% of my practicing life. And in 1987, I became chairman of the Young Barristers Committee of the Bar Council, which changed my approach to the law and changed my approach to the profession a lot. The key thing that happened was that as chairman of the Young Bar, you do exchange visits and you go to the opening of the legal year in different countries. So I went all around Europe, and then I went to America, which I'd never been to. And I joined the American Bar Association. Well, I was a guest.
Wow.
But I joined very quickly, and I started going to the American Bar every year. And I did the New York Bar in 1989, and I was called to the New York Bar in 1990. And at that time, I think I thought I was going to do more American law. I genuinely saw that there would be globalization of the law. I genuinely saw there would be more transatlantic opportunities.
Yes.
And that's something that really changed my approach. It's also changed my approach in that although we call ourselves the independent bar, and we're very proud of it, and rightly so, the independent bar flourishes across the world, and attorneys in America regard themselves as the independent bar, even if they're in firms, as should all lawyers, because its key thing is independence from governments, I always think.
Yes, it is. It is.
But that shaped my career quite a lot, and I did think about doing it. Mrs. McDermott, who I'd recently met, wasn't so sure. She was very happy for me to become involved in the American Bar Association. I'm very involved in it, but didn't really want to move to America.
No. Now, I want to focus on some of the cases that you've conducted, if I may. And there are so many. I don't want to suspend the whole podcast. People can go on Bailey and look you up, quite frankly. But do you have a most memorable case in all your careers at the bar that you can perhaps share?
I suppose I have a few. And I represented the health service bodies in the Shipman Inquiry. And in fact, I can very well remember the afternoon that I went on a train to London with the investigating officers from the Shipman investigation to suspend Harold Shipman before a health service tribunal. And that was memorable because it was the area that I was from. It was at a stage when they didn't really quite comprehend the scale of his offending, but they knew that it was bad.
Yes.
And I felt it was a very important brief. I was pleased to have been instructed in the way that you are as a professional, if there's something you'd like to be instructed in. And it changed me because actually thereafter, when there's a public inquiry, by that time I was in silk, and the health service bodies came back to me. It was fascinating. It was fascinating to learn about the health service and its structures. Perhaps most importantly, it taught me a huge amount about putting victims at the center of everything.
Yes.
I was for the health service bodies, but I tried to look at it through their eyes, everything we did. And in fact, the victims were represented, I say that the bereaved, effectively, the bereaved and their families were represented by Anne Alexander and Richard Lissack. And Richard had done a number of public inquiries, and I got to like Richard and other people from his chambers very well, so much so that I joined their chambers. So I'm in Outer Temple chambers because they were representing the families and the bereaved in the Shipman Inquiry.
Yeah.
I've done others. The one case in personal injury, I suppose, I think about is a case called Noble and Owens, which was all about personal injury fraud. But a key case in my career was Shipman.
Gerard, one of the questions I want to ask you, and just a reminder about Harold Shipman, he was a doctor who was killing his patients. Would that be a fair description?
He was. It was extraordinary.
Yes.
And he was in Hyde in East Manchester. I'd lived in Hyde until quite recently I suppose I lived in Hyde until about 1995, and he was arrested, I think, in 1998. And yes, he was murdering them with morphine overdoses, effectively. And the numbers were extraordinary. And the people spoke about a gulf of disbelief that this could possibly be true.
Yes.
And so it was. And as a result, there was a 2 or 3 year inquiry which Dame Janet Smith led, in which Caroline Swift was for the inquiry, and a huge number of other people instructed to represent different interests. It was, it changed my career,
yes,
really.
I bet. Gerard, one of the things that you've been doing for the last 10 years or so is taking legal assistants, so people looking for pupilages or training contracts. And I'm very interested in diversity of the bar, in terms of ethnicity, gender, social mobility, sexuality to an extent, and religion. But that is a sure way to me of improving some of the diversity and aspects of the bar that we still struggle with. So I want to ask you really, one, why were you doing that? And two, what would you change about the bar?
I think access to the bar as a profession has been a problem for a long time. I think we've made a lot of steps forward. I think we are far, far forward from where we were 40 years ago and even 20 years ago or 10 years ago. The reason I did it was I quite often took students from Manchester University for a few weeks as student interns, paying them properly. I completely disagree with this idea of people interning without pay. It's so unequal, and it means that it's restricted to those who've got the money to see them through, and quite often to people who are friends of the person who's doing it. And we all know that's not really good for diversity. And Manchester University called me one day and said, "We know you've taken some of our students sometimes. We've got someone who's really, really good, just hasn't quite got pupillage. Would you think about seeing her?" I said, "Yeah." So it's quite funny. And I won't mention her name, but some people know she was. And so I called her and I said, "Well, why don't you come and talk to me?" And she said, "Okay, when?" I said, "Well, now." And she said, "You don't realize, you gave me 5 minutes notice to come and see you." So I took her on for a few weeks, and my wife is an expert witness, and she had bought some premises in Stalybridge, which plenty of space, and I'd taken an extra room there, so separate from my chambers, and there was room for an assistant. And so I started doing that. And then about 12 months later, Manchester University said, "We hear it's going quite well. Do you have room for anyone else?" And so, in fact, I took someone on who was still at university, who worked for me 1 or 2 days a week, devoted to coming to the bar. And it helped me hugely. I was becoming very busy as a QC. I had, lucky, I was having quite a lot of cases brought in. And I used them to do research, to do attendance notes, to work with my clerks. And I like to think I taught them quite a bit too. I think the essentials are that we paid them properly. They were properly accommodated. They were full employees. My wife helped with managing them and so on. And thereafter, since then, I've always had at least one and sometimes two legal assistants. And of the permanent legal assistants I've ever had, I'm very pleased to say that out of, I think, 11, all of them have gone on to pupillage or in one case, a training contract on their own merits, I should say. But in my own way, I'm very proud of doing that. I'm probably prouder of doing that than anything else I've done at the bar.
Fantastic.
Because we know how difficult it is getting pupillage. They were very often people who weren't just getting it on the first round, but they were so able. And it helped me. I like to think we all enjoyed doing it and so on. And I see them progressing in their careers now. One of them sends me quite a lot of work, so that works very well.
Well, there's always a benefit to being kind, isn't there? But I'm sure that's not really why you were doing it. You were trying to improve the access, which I think is wonderful.
It was two sides. It was helping me, but I knew it would help them. And I came to the bar. I had no connections at all, and of course, we didn't get pupillage awards in those days either. And I think Robert Alexander, who was chairman of the bar in 1986, I remember him giving a speech to foreign lawyers in which he said, "Bacon said that I hold every man a debtor to his profession." I never really understood that until I realized that once you're established in this profession, part of being a profession is making sure you look after those who will follow you and encourage everyone into it.
Absolutely. And Gerard, we're both very proud of the Northern Circuit where we practice, and we teach advocacy on our circuit and sometimes elsewhere. And some of our fellow tutors have a nickname for you, which is we call you the Master because you are the master trainer. And in terms of the advocacy. So I wonder if you had any tips for good advocacy in all these professional years, maybe 3 short tips for how to be a good advocate.
Everyone says preparation, and preparation is important. Actually, I think for younger barristers, learn from others. Difficult in this lockdown period, but if you're a criminal bar and you're doing a morning of pleas, if such a thing still exists, watch the others that are there. I was lucky to see some of the Northern Circuit greats in cases, and I learned and I saw what worked. My final one, this is a conversation. It's a conversation with the judge. You don't know what he or she thinks, but imagine if you were in their position, what would you be wanting to hear that might persuade you? So I would describe myself as a conversational advocate.
Yes, yeah. And so what would you change about the bar?
It's a remarkable profession. It has punched above its weight, and it continues to punch above its weight. But it's maybe a bit too hierarchical, and it's conservative with a small c. In addition to my practices in self-employed practice at King's, James in Manchester and Outer Temple in London, I have a company, and I've started to do somewhat more work, direct access with the public. When I say direct access, I'm fully authorised as an entity by the Bar Standards Board, and I can undertake litigation. I don't think I'd want to start undertaking litigation large scale. I think I've learned that isn't really what we do. I think the bar needs to embrace corporate structure and partnerships more than it does. That is a complete anathema to many. I understand that. There are a number of reasons for doing it. I think that certainly in the fields of publicly funded work, and well, not publicly funded work actually, outside some areas such as commercial and tax and IP and maybe chancery, I think we're becoming weaker in terms of our relative position as against solicitors. I think there's a lot to be gained from working together. Many people remain horrified at this idea. What would I change? If I were 15 years younger, what would I do? I'd probably develop into a pupils training organization. I'd probably take on pupils and not legal assistants. I'd try and persuade them to stay with me. I hope I will persuade some more senior juniors to come join me, maybe 1 or 2 Queen's Counsel, and we'd have an advocacy practice. And we'd be able to offer a better service to those who want to use us. We'd be able to offer more security to those who want to join the profession, and actually more security generally. And in an era when the criminal bar, for instance, is in desperate straits income-wise and so on, maybe you make it a common law practice and you make sure that you always provided for criminal representation. That's not a fully developed idea, and I probably won't ever do it. But if I was younger, that's what I'd do. As I say, complete anathema to many at the bar, but as you know, it's a very solitary profession in some respects. Of course, that's what we like about it. The thing is that actually we should have more support. I cannot imagine really how a busy silk in any field manages without a legal assistant. I have one, and I now have a legal executive who's working part-time for me. They manage my diary, they manage relations with my solicitors, they prepare summaries, attendance notes, they do legal research, and it's good for both of us. So I think that's the essential thing I think I would change. The other thing is it's conservative partly because, we have the Inns and the Bar Council, and even though we've changed a lot, and even at my stage, there's a lot of deference to the authorities. Which I think has changed somewhat, and I think in terms of diversity, the bar has recognised it needs to change a lot. But that's the one thing I think I'd change. It'd be a big change. It would
be a very big change, but it's changing already, isn't it? Because DWF, who are a law firm, they have this advocacy section of that law firm where effectively they're doing what you're talking about. They don't have any QCs, but they do employ barristers who want to go in-house, as it were, and they're all advocates. I don't know if you've seen that model, but it's interesting.
I have. And actually, I should say there are some firms that have developed from effectively partnerships at the bar, and there are some people out there doing it very well. I think it's a perfectly sensible approach. There are more QCs operating in firms. Again, I suppose one alternative, if I was rather younger, would be to go approach a firm and say, why don't we set up an advocacy department? I think that firms of solicitors don't do it more often because, of course, what we do produce at the bar, and this will be the first argument against us, against my ideas, would be there's a real diversity of style and diversity of expertise that's available from the independent bar that there wouldn't if they went into firms. And I see that. I think that might be molded a little bit, but the benefits that there would be, I think, are very significant. I've never been afraid of fusion, Sally, partly because of contacts I've made in the profession worldwide. The important thing about lawyers is that we are independent, that we have integrity, and we put the client first. And those are the really vital things, I think. The structures within which we work are less so. I mean, the chambers structure, it can be somewhat unstable. And we've all seen chambers that fold. My chambers at 8 King Street folded. And we see that every day. We've seen the criminal bar have to reorganize quite a lot. I see there's one chambers in London, which at least one, which has moved to sort of virtual offices. They have some central offices, and I can see the sense of that. That's where I think the bar could go. Whether it will, I don't know. I mean, I've observed a lot of people who've been chair of the bar, and maybe 15, 20 years ago, certainly 15 years ago, people suggested maybe I should think about doing it. I knew I wouldn't be able to change the bar enough in a year, and I'd come away frustrated. Yes. And I think that's the fact. The people who get involved in Bar Council do just outstanding work. People don't understand, I think, very often how much work is done. And the other thing about the bar is we don't take enough time to think about where we want to go. We're so busy doing cases, sometimes either at breakneck speed or in haste, that we don't get time to think about where we want to develop our practice to be.
It's interesting. Gerard, what do you think about longevity at the bar? I always say, actually, being at the bars it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so I wondered if you had any tips. The attrition rates for women still aren't great. And as you pointed out, publicly funded bar, there are so many difficulties, but I want to be upbeat. So I just wondered if you got any tips or advice for longevity at the bar. And then I want to ask you about entering the bar. Any kind of tips for remaining upbeat if you're just entering the bar? So what about longevity, first of all?
Well, I suppose having been at the bar more than 40 years, I'm beginning to think about longevity at the bar. I think you're right about the importance of retaining particularly women and the proper maternity allowances and so on. But I mean, when I say allowances, I mean, molding chambers. So it's not just feasible, but it can be done really well. I can think of really quite a number of women barristers who I admire hugely the way they have combined a hugely successful career at the bar and very often being depended upon to take the lion's share of the work as a parent. And I recognize that does often fall in that way. In terms of longevity at the bar, well, I suppose you've got to decide at some stage, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a judge? And that's a perfectly sensible approach. Do you want to be a barrister? What are you going to do in your later years? I mean, I am developing just some different fields beyond the areas that I'm known for. I'm not about to retire anytime soon, but I want to look at, other areas that I might operate in. I do some international work and I might develop that. I don't know whether that's quite addressing the question that you had. I mean, it's looking at it from my angle. I think that for people coming to the bar, well, first of all, and again, this applies to the publicly funded bar in particular, the publicly funded bar they're all working in vital areas. And we just need to keep pressing the government to understand how vital it is and how it needs to be funded properly. Otherwise, there will be no one to represent the interests of those who so desperately need it.
Absolutely. And what about people starting out in their career? This COVID pandemic has brought a lot of issues and negativity. But you've managed to keep an open mind. I just admire the various things you've done with your career. What if you're starting or aspiring to enter the profession?
That's interesting. I mean, first of all, you make me think back to when I started at the bar. And although I want to change it and people think I'm wrong, what a wonderful time I had. I cannot think of a better city. This will cause controversy because there are plenty of other cities where I like going to. But I can't think I could have had a better pupillage and career as a young barrister than Manchester. The real sense of belonging, the friendships, such a great city, the circuit, including Liverpool, Preston and Carlisle, of course, and now Chester. So I think, first of all, try and do things that you enjoy, an area of work that you enjoy. Pace yourself. For anyone wanting to find out if the bar's for them, it is a bit old-fashioned in the sense that everyone does it, but some mini pupillages. Read everything that you can. Actually, I
Yes.
like Twitter. I think for anyone who wants to be a barrister, follow lawyers on Twitter. You and I know there's a real legal community on Twitter. It'll give you a lot of information. Sometimes it'll give some fun. Sometimes it'll give you an update on either politics or the law. Adam Wagner from Doughty Street has done a great job with his coronavirus tweets and blog and so on. People like Sean Jones, any number of people. And I think anyone that wants to join the bar who lets us know that that's what they want to do, they'll find that people embrace them and give them real tips. A number of people have been trying to help with pupillage applications in this time, where it's not easy to do face-to-face advice. And it really is, find out as much as you can.
Well, that leads me nicely. I was coming on to Twitter beautifully because you've got over 10,000 followers. And you're not shy about going on there at all. I've met your cats. I've seen them in the snow. It really is good. But the question really I've got for you is about well-being. Burnout rate of the bar is still high. And I wonder if Twitter plays a part in your well-being, whether it keeps you grounded. And if not, what do you do to relax? And what do you do for your well-being?
I think it does. Twitter was suggested to me by a public relations consultant that I engaged. Imagine that, a barrister having a public relations consultant. It's Melissa Davis from MD Comms, and she said, you should go on Twitter.
She's lovely.
She's great. And so I went on Twitter, and it grew, and I met people on there, and I realized that there was, you could have a socially good time, pictures of cats and meeting people, but also, you could have some influence over people's approaches to things. I doubt that Donald Trump has ever looked at one of my tweets, but I've replied to him quite a lot.
Have you?
I'm missing him a little bit, really, though it's all, thank goodness, a lot quieter without him. And I've engaged with all sorts of people. I've come across real kindness on Twitter, too, from people and people offering to help out and so on. And what do I do for downtime? Not enough is the answer. I like travel. I love the opera. I go to the American Bar Association every year, generally, and I get very involved in the litigation section of the ABA a lot. So in normal years, I'm in the States 2 or 3 times a year. I think that one thing I've done as a result of lockdown is walk a lot more. People won't necessarily appreciate that Ashton-under-Lyne has some lovely, lovely areas to walk around. I'm very lucky. I live on the edge, and it's great. So I walk. The cats are a big part of it. Oddly enough, I really like mooching around Ashton-under-Lyne on a Saturday morning. I think it's a great town. Many more people will know it. It's an old industrial mill town. It's come on, and I'm very proud of that, and Stalybridge, which is where I have my offices. So I get involved in that, I suppose.
You're quite well read. What's your favourite book and why? And do you have a favourite fictional lawyer?
Interestingly, I'm not as well read as you might think. I find I've not got a lot of time to read books, but my wife bought me Barack Obama's A Promised Land for Christmas. I just think he's fabulous. I think everything he's done is just remarkable. And the book is a delight to read. I haven't finished it yet, but you can almost put yourself in the room listening to what he's doing. Yeah. In terms of favourite fictional lawyer, it's got to be Kavanagh QC.
Well, we've not had that.
Manchester Silk goes to London.
Oh, John Thor. Wonderful. And if someone was going to play you in a dramatization, who would you be?
Oh, You didn't warn me of that one. I have no idea.
Well, just think about it just for now. Come on, advocacy master.
I just don't. I've never thought about it because I know no one's ever going to make a film about me.
They might write about you. And what's next? Where would you like to go next? You're not retiring, thank goodness. Your Twitter following is expanding. Your practice is wonderful. You're giving back to the profession. I just wondered what's next, and where would you like to take your career?
I suppose 12, 13 years ago, I might have thought about becoming a judge. I did think about it, and I sat as a recorder. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it would constrain me somewhat. I enjoyed it, and I hope I had the required degree of compassion, which I think is an essential part of being a judge. I really like working in Stalybridge, actually. I've tried to get involved with some local projects in Stalybridge. I think that one thing I want to do, and I'm trying to do, is give back more to the community. That sounds a bit bland, but it's very real. I think, again, many of us have been very fortunate in this life, and there are many people who haven't been as fortunate. It's much easier for me to survive lockdown with a comparatively big house and garden and no children to homeschool, whereas in many places, Ashton included, a lot of people must be struggling hard.
Absolutely. And it doesn't sound bland at all. You're spot on. If we can all give back to our communities. Gerard, just before we go, I've asked you an awful lot of questions here, but I wonder if we went back to the young Gerard before he entered the bar. Would you have any advice for sort of your 21-year-old self?
Work hard when you're at university to get the best degree that you can, because it will be one of the determinants about where you can start your career and how quickly. Well, it's certainly about where you can start your career. It will help you in your pupillage applications.
Wow. Gerard McDermott, it's been a long time since I've been chasing you to come on to talk to me about the law and your career, and you haven't disappointed. It's been wonderful having you here. Any last messages, perhaps, for the various different types of people who listen to this podcast?
I think the most important message we've learned about the law this year is the importance of the rule of law. The most horrific thing I think I've seen in my legal career is what we all saw on the 6th of January, when the mob tried to storm Congress. And it really writes it in stark contrast, the importance of the rule of law. It's not just empty words. It's about the civilized way of organizing society.
Yes. That's really caused me to be silent, actually. I'm reflecting. Yeah.
So
Well, Gerard McDermott, it's been wonderful. I hope you'll come back when that film is written and you write your memoirs to talk to me about your legal career. But it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much.
I'd be delighted to.
A huge thank you to Gerard McDermott QC for talking law with me today. We'd love you to rate and review our podcast, and of course, tell other people working in the law about us. Do connect with me, Sally Penny MBE, on social media. You can find me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter at SallyPenny1. Thanks to our production team, Sam Walker and Michael Blaze at What Goes On Media. See you next time.